Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Journey to Awakening podcast. I'm Ron Ario, your host, author of Journey to Awakening and the Quantum Performance Coach. And if you happen to like this podcast, this interview today, please subscribe. And I've got a special woman with me today. Her name is Efrossini Chaniotis. She is an artist extraordinaire. And before we just get into our dialogue, Effie, I just want to explain why I have asked you to come on. Okay, so I have happened across her artwork on Facebook and just started becoming a fan because it seems to have such a signature to it and stands out. As you can see in her background, it just stands out. And to me, it stands out like famous artists that have been from the past when you really look at their artwork and and you know who it is just by looking at it. It has its own energy and its own signature. And Effie, that's what your artwork has really inspired me, and I really have grown to love it. But before we get into um, well, actually, before we get into your past, because I'd like to know about when you grew up and everything else, but maybe you can just let the viewers know right now your technical aspects of your artwork, some of your training, and then I want to digress a little bit. So some of your training, and then I want to take the viewers on a little journey. Okay, if you can do that, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, Ron. So I've never done anything like this before, so who knows what's going to happen, hey? This is
It's
going
all
to be
good.
interesting. Um, yeah, it's easy to talk about my training. It was formal. So I went to art school. I was born in Australia in a city called Adelaide. And I went to the main art school there and did my 5 years of study. And I majored in, it was interesting because I had a natural ability with drawing and painting, but very early on, like in my first year, I got mentored and by one of the professors there, and he suggested that it wasn't the best place to study painting because it had a very conceptual strength base, sort of more contemporary art, and the training in painting and drawing was pretty rudimentary. It wasn't that strong. And I took his advice because I was a bit like a sponge. I was just taking everything in and appreciated the direction. And I think intuitively I understood what he said was right. So I went into the sculpture department, and in the sculpture department, I I learned probably more how to think, how to investigate and explore and be adventurous and think laterally, which was probably a really impressive tool to be given so early on. Um, and I continued to paint and draw, but that, I think the essence of that stayed quite dormant. And I became a performance artist, an installation artist, and very open-minded and exploratory in the way that I did my art then. But I had a tendency for my performance and my installations to have elements of autobiography in them, and they tended to go a little bit too deep for what the setting could hold and support me with. And then at the end of my training, and I was, in inverted commas, successful. I was doing really well and could have easily gone on to the next stage, which was to start getting scholarships and start working within the art arena in this city where I was. And a voice inside of me just knew it wasn't right. Like I was disconnected from what I was creating. I was doing it really well and getting all the right feedback to encourage me, but this sense of being successful for the sake of being successful was really, really strong. That didn't resonate with me, and so I felt really at a loss at the end of that year. Rather than flowing on, I felt stuck, and so then I went and what you do is you take a gap year or something like that. Like I just said, I'm going to go to Greece where my family are based, my grandparents and relatives, and just go for a summer holiday. And as a joke, I said to my friends, I'll see you in 5 years, as I packed my suitcase just for the summer and went with $20 in my pocket, just one way ticket, because I knew I'd be supported by family. I'd be able to get my way back if I needed to. And 8 years later, I came back.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question, Effie.
Yes.
When you were younger, did you have any inclination for art at all?
Yes, very much so.
When did you, how old were you when you discovered that you actually had a talent for art?
So I don't know. I didn't recognize that I had a talent for art, but what I do remember, and see, I'm Greek Australian, so my parents were, Greek. They migrated to Australia. It was in the early 70s, and there was still racism in the schools. Like, you still felt that you didn't fit into the Anglo context. So what I remember is being disregarded in the school system, or just like that I didn't matter. This is a lot of people experience versions of this. Everyone's going to describe it differently. But I remember the art teacher speaking to my mum one day at the end of school. I don't know how young I was, but I was pretty young. And it was almost like I was on the ceiling looking down at their conversation. And I don't know why I have that memory. But it was hearing the teacher tell my mum that I'm gifted, that I'm talented, and encouraging her to support me, to encourage my direction. And it's funny, it's like a seed of a memory that I have that told me that I was good at that. But, there must have been so much other stuff going on. And that was always the art room was always my retreat as a young girl. And then I remember once as well, my father was a real big businessman, always busy and always saying, I'll be back in 5 minutes, and then coming back in an hour if he left you in the car while he goes and does business. But one day I was with him and we went and visited a friend of his, and we went into the garage and he was painting this painting of horses. And I remember standing over his shoulder as a child and watching him as he was painting. This was an unusual setting and an unusual occurrence. It wasn't something that was normal in my family culture or in outings with my dad. So again, I have that almost like a dream memory, and I often revert back to those images if someone asks me about what my early connections to making art were. But I'm sure that there are many others, but those are the ones for today.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. So, there's many artists out there, and you always hear the term struggling artist. And it looks like you've been able to really transcend that space. And, I have always had compassion for artists, because they really are following their bliss. And so often they can't earn a living just following their bliss. And at what point did you come to because those creative people watching this, I want them to be inspired by you, okay? Because one of the things we're going to talk about today is not only the next question I have, but also your levels of attention, your consciousness, how it relates to your painting, the space that you go into, because that's a very creative space, and I would refer to it as a spiritual space, okay? But at what point did you say, I can, or I'm going to make a living at this? And what was that moment like for you?
It's funny because I can't answer in the way that you might expect. I'm not saying that you expect me necessarily.
Whatever your answer is, that'll be appropriate.
Because that language has never entered my mind. Even deciding has never, and that's um, not to discredit when people come to that sort of crossroad or that decision, and we all come to those sorts of decisions. But for me personally, with absolute honesty, integrity, truthfulness, yeah, I've never come to that.
You never had to question it.
No,
Well,
and it's like someone says you did this, and oh, that's so courageous. I go, no, I just did it. So courage comes when you're faced with fear and you overcome it. You can't attribute courage to something that just came to you easily, or that you can't even pinpoint when in your awareness or consciousness you made a decision.
I
So
get you.
on some level, the decision to make this my purpose, my career, my direction, the thing I'm going to either struggle or not struggle with, never even came about to me, Ron.
Well, I think that's a beautiful answer.
Sorry?
In your answer, Effie, lies the solution for those that want to earn a living, fulfilling their passion, is because you never questioned it. So
I should say, I remember I did question it.
Oh, can't go back now.
It's a different kind of, it's got a different kind of angle. So I remember I had already a fine art degree at the end of my first art school, because I had a second art school. I went and did it again in Greece. But at the end of the year, my last year of art school in Australia, where I'm officially an artist, let's say, you know what I mean? I've got the paper. I remember no, even conversation's a journey. Let me correct myself. I remember sitting on the ground trying to decide whether I'm going to go into phys ed or into art school at the end of high school. And again, when I made the decision, it was just a moment of inspiration. I don't remember being terribly troubled, because already the stream was so strong, because I would get lost in the art school in the art room every lunch in my last 2 years of high school. So maybe at that point was where I felt like I had to make a decision, and the decision wasn't hard.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
I have to think about that, because I think well before that, my journey towards art had started.
Well, I think most artists would probably, especially when they have the level of talent you have, and there's, talented people out there, where they have to make a decision. Okay, do I continue on following my soul and my bliss, and do I continue being guided by that energy, or do I make the adjustments to survive? And and sometimes that's a very tough decision to have to make, and it would take courage at that point. But you seem to have made it at a young enough age, to where you really set the tone, that it wasn't the courage, but it was your natural intuition to follow that stream, that was most natural to you, and
that feels accurate. That's an accurate way, yeah. Because I don't feel I had needed courage when I confronted my parents that I wanted to study art. That was courage. But
okay, so I have a question for you. What inspires you? What inspires you in your art? Because I got to tell you, the painting to your left behind you, that one right there, when I see your stuff that you put up and I look, I'm always, oh my gosh, that looks beautiful, you know? And that painting right there just has an energy about it. So, what inspired you with, say, that particular? Well, actually, first, two questions. What inspires you in general? And then let's talk about that painting specifically, okay?
Okay. Um, what inspires me in general? Well, it's at different times, different things will inspire me. So how do I narrow that down? So what inspired me yesterday doesn't inspire me tomorrow. In in general, I'm I'm inspired to create for the sake of creating. I mean, that's just a base. That's a base to start with.
Well,
So
I think it's all gonna whittle down to a core. You're gonna have different inspirations, but after it goes through the sifter, it's gonna come down to a place that's always feels
yeah.
familiar.
So if we
You,
were talking about essence, I'm inspired. I'm inspired to be alive. I'm inspired to um, learn how to the art of living more and more, and through my art, I connect to that. Is that one way to say it? It's
well,
simply
let me be more specific with my question. What inspires you to create? In your work, what inspires you? What gives you the inspiration to sit down and make something happen and put something? What is it inside of you that wants, is inspired to come out and be a part of that creative process? What is it?
yeah. So there's two ways I could answer that. So one way is very practical. You do what you're good at. You just do it. It's like making those decisions that I said that didn't consciously need courage. You just there's certain things you just do. So when you wake up and you open your eye, you just do. So there's a part of making art for someone who's attuned to that process, like myself. Like it's a muscle I've exercised so strongly. Um, I just do, and that doesn't sound glamorous or metaphysical. It doesn't sound like very much. Very simple. And then you create because it's work. So I inspiration is can be quite esoteric, and there's a deeper way of describing what inspires you, the impulse for that. But the first side that I'm talking about, which is a little bit more mundane, is that it's work. Like you can generate inspiration through practice, through routine, through clocking on and clocking off. That's not the very glamorous side of creating, but it's really important too. So the work, the doing is the skill, it's the expertise, it's the discipline. And without that, for my this particular strain of work that I do, because you can make art through pure, everyone can make art, everyone can express themselves. But we're talking about a specific kind of art that I'm doing. So that requires dedication and just doing, working at it.
And I'm
Hard.
and then I just want to interject because I'm going to disagree with you just on one thing, and I'll tell you, it's actually a compliment. So it's mundane to you, okay? But it's innate to you. And I think what's really special about artists in general is they're tapping in to something beyond their, at a deeper level of consciousness, where I think a lot of people that have very linear professions would envy that you're able to step into such a creative space. Now, that doesn't mean that the accountant is not in his element. with all the numbers, and they just love that space. And maybe they can even get lost in that space and really appreciate it if that coincides with their core, you know?
Can I not disagree with you now? But what I would say too is the accountant, as an example, if he wanted to, so if he was motivated and wanted to do art that was inspired, that had technical skill eventually or through practice, and was driven by all kinds of forces and created wonderful output for him, experiences and product, but he did it every day, and every time he practiced it, him and I would be able to talk about the same things.
Absolutely. But he wouldn't be able to do it every day unless he had the passion for it. And so
that's the distinction.
That's where I'm going.
This is what I do every day. This is the thing that I use. This is where I put the sum total, the majority of my attention to. So
yes.
I don't want to undermine my particular skill and my particular vision and my particular work and expertise. There is a side of it that everyone could tap into. It's just whether you want to. If your attention is drawn elsewhere, well, you're going to excel in the thing that you put most of your attention to. Whatever you put your attention to grows. Isn't that what we always say in this kind of domain? Isn't that what we talk about? Well, it's very matter of fact.
Yeah,
that's the main bit. I'm using that as
and for the listener listening to you right now, one of the reasons I was inspired to speak to you on the podcast is I want the listener to be inspired by the creative side that you get to embellish in and really revel in on a regular basis, even though it is a job and even though it is somewhat mundane as it becomes a work. It's still a very right-brained exercise, which I think is incredibly healthy for us to engage in, because we are a consciousness, we are a soul, and to be able to have that creative outlet. I want those to be inspired by this conversation from a very talented artist, So my next question is, the painting behind you, is there a level of inspiration that went into that particular painting? Okay.
My darling Ron, so now I can talk about the other side of inspiration, which actually I equally, or maybe a little bit more, like talking about this side. But the other side is good as a grounding to sort of, I think it's an equalizer. I like to start with that because I'm also often motivated to encourage creativity in others. So say the inspiration with the painting behind that's called Earth Icon number 2 because there's a series of 3. There was meant to be 4, but the 4th had its own ideas. So and what I mean by that is I work more and more so there's lots of different ways of making art, lots of different intentions and lots of different different purposes that artists have, and so the kind of work they make and the kind of meaning that they attribute to it and how they describe the creative process will vary depending on what their tack is. And so the thing that I align myself with is believing that or recognizing that there's an intelligence in the art itself. So here you make your art and you say, oh, there's a part of my soul in that, or it's an extension of me, or I can see you in that, or it's saying something about you. And I get all that, but it's actually an incredibly powerful tool and or a relationship to have with the thing that you're creating, to think of it and treat it and recognize it, more importantly, as being separate from you. So that allows me to ask my art questions, to get curious, equally the same way as a viewer would be curious if you walk into a gallery or you walk into someone's house and you see an artwork and you've got the space in you, which is important, and the presence to give it time because it's quiet. It's not like a commercial. It's not going to entertain you in the same way as fast things. So if you're present with an artwork, you know, a piece like these we're talking about, you will be affected by it, and you will possibly have questions, or you'll have stories or associations that will awaken when you're looking at something.
This is where this is where I want you to go, dear.
Yes.
This
so
is
if I take the same, if I have that same regard for it and respect for an artwork as the viewer, then I'm affected by it. So then it doesn't become but as an example, it's not just an expression of my ego or my subconscious. It becomes a living, breathing presence with, okay, so if we're talking about sacred geometry and we look at the Tibetan sand paintings and mandalas, we know and we recognize that different shapes and colors have a different effect on us. And science has acknowledged that. So what if all those abstracts, those geometric shapes are put together to create a picture of a person? When you reduce it down to shapes and colors, really it is, again, shapes and colors. It's just that one artist puts them together to create the scene of a landscape, or a scene of a person or someone standing on their head with, you know, with an umbrella in the background. I mean, whatever that picture is, when it's reduced down to its forms, really it is first just shapes and colors. So if I relate to an artwork as having its own consciousness or presence, then I can have a dialogue with it, or I can allow it to lead me, to tell me, to teach me, to guide me, to affect me.
Yes.
To open me up to things. And that's just, again, one way to describe it.
Well, and then if I can just interject, it's like, for instance, an actor, when they're creating a character, they have to really be with that character, and the character almost begins to lead them into the development of the character. So when you're interacting, let's say, with that piece behind you, and you've taken the time to be in its presence, and you've allowed it to communicate with you, and it has affected you emotionally, well, that becomes a living consciousness that goes on forever, because other people can have the same experience based on the intention that you put into it, because everything is energy, and that artwork that you create is energetic. It doesn't die.
Yes, that's right. So the kind of connections that people will make with it it's lots of possibilities. The same as for me. Now, let me give a bit of an example. When I say sometimes I ask it a question. It's happening instantaneously in a sort of peripheral space. It's happening while I'm putting colors and shapes. So again, it's in that state of flow when you're creating that's happening. And it's hard to define and fix it. Sometimes it's really clear. Other times it's happening so quickly, and it's happening while in the process of creating. But I'm attuned. I've worked so much. I'm so good at working in that space that a lot of things happen in that space. I'm just trying to pull out little things that I can identify to describe to you. But there's other, again.
I get it.
Conversations. But I want to just to give it, to ground it back to the actual artwork and the process. So say this painting, I was doing the story behind it was that I was working on a solo exhibition that was called The Fisherman and Mermaid's Tale. That was from just 2 years ago. Now this story, it's based on story. So I'm back to the question of what inspires me. Another thing that I use and that inspires me is storytelling, and storytelling through the art and with the art and by the art, following the artwork and unraveling the story that it's telling, and then actually performing the story, which is something that's happening currently. It's where the work is developing, is actually performing the story in a gallery space with artwork there as signposts. And then this is opening me up to more things that I want to do with that. But the story, I was traveling around South America for about a year, and in Brazil, when I was in Brazil at a point, I was making some artwork for a hotel, you know, as exchange for accommodation, and because I was near it was a coastal town, I started painting this fisherman and mermaid, and I kid you not, and it doesn't always happen exactly in the same way. It was really a story just jumped out at me, and not just one phrase, like a full-blown story from making these two paintings quite intuitively. And when I had to I described the paintings that I was making for this hotel to some children that I'd befriended, a couple of Brazilian families that I'd befriended in that little village. And as I was describing the artwork to them, I was telling them, yeah, it relates to a story, and they wanted to know what the story was about. So I actually did this whole performance, pantomime, describe it. They brought out chairs and created an amphitheater of plastic chairs, invited the grandmother and the auntie and the cousins, and I had an audience of me just telling them the story behind these two paintings I had just created.
Wow.
And what was just little pinpoints, you know, across the time scale of a story that I had, got filled out as I, you know, improvised, describing this story a little bit more to them. And I couldn't get that out of my head because it was so big, and it felt like it was a little bit outside of me what had come about. Because there were so many influences, so many forces at play when this story came to pass, yeah? So when I came back to Australia, eventually, after a little while, I decided this story was worthy of manifesting into more artworks. And so that is one example, and it's only one example of what inspires me.
Thank you.
What inspired this painting.
Thank you for sharing that, Effie, because here's the thing. The name of the podcast is Journey to Awakening. And, you know, I created a platform to where I can have individuals like yourself come and share relevant aspects of their life and their stories as it pertains to consciousness. And I just know intuitively that any artist that's on the top of their game, they're accessing higher levels of their multidimensional awareness, and which I would simply refer to as their soul. And whether it's done in a way that is so innate that they don't even recognize it, or whether they're really consciously aware of it, it is a gift. And I want other people that are on the cusp of becoming aware, on the cusp of their own personal awakenings, to understand the deeper aspects of themselves. And the great respect I have for you and other artists is that you're expressing it in a tangible way for people to see in a really incredible form. And that's your soul. You're very gifted to be able to have the ability to take your soul out and put it into a tangible form that is so creative. And so what I want...
my soul is your soul, and it's others'
I
soul.
understand, but it's still your unique expression. And I want to have people watching be able to go into their unique expression, whether it be art or whether it be whatever it may be, but it's their own unique expression. So we're talking about, yeah, it's okay.
As an artist, we're tapping into something that's also universal. So, not look again. I'm aware that there are many different kinds of artists and ways of making art. So, back the kind of work that I do, I align myself with knowing that I'm tapping into universal themes and
Absolutely.
people will connect with. Now they can be, I can be the catalyst for someone. The work can be a catalyst for their own creativity, or they recognize something of themselves or something in something that I'm doing that's separate from them. Either way, that and beyond that, it's still work that is of service to others. And then the beauty, the thing that I've come to connect with, or that I came to a realization with, that was really, really important for me to sustain my motivation to keep making, not my motivation, to bring me greater depth in why I do what I do, was when I realized that when I do what's coming from me, rather, really from me, for my own enjoyment, like it's, oh my goodness, it's so much fun, like it's so much fun. And it's a mind bender and it's hard work and it's anxiety provoking sometimes. Hey, it's not always cool, calm and collected, but doing it for me actually becomes something for others.
Well,
And
and
I love that. I love having that
and
connection.
that's beautiful. And the truth is, what you just said is another metaphor for, even in love, we can only love somebody to the degree that we can love ourselves, right? So when you're really pouring your heart in it for yourself, you're going to naturally have the greatest impact on other people, you know? So Effie, listen, for the sake of time, because we usually allow for an hour, I've got 13 pieces that I saved. Okay. Now we're not going to have enough time to elaborate 5 minutes on each one, but I want people to see the different kind of artwork you have. Okay. So give me a moment. And then I want to talk, before we end today, I also want to talk about art therapy. Okay. And we've already kind of expanded on the consciousness of it, which I'm very pleased about, because I can feel that energy, and I know other people are going to be able to feel it as well. So give me a second here to share the screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yes. Oh,
Okay,
I've got that one behind me. Yeah.
okay. So I just, you could just, the name of it, Constellation Landscape Waterfall. That's the name I have right here.
This one's called Waterfall, and it's from a series called Constellation Landscapes.
Okay.
So this is a painting of star trees. So at the end of an epic solo exhibition that I did, as a way of closure, I found myself really drawn to one painting that I had created in that exhibition that showed a woman running down a hill in a star-filled background, sort of starlight kind of time, just just when the stars start coming out, and her clothing had the same stars in them, so she was sort of camouflaging into the background. And I had never done anything like that before. Something else had led me to that kind of way of painting. So I couldn't get that out of my mind. And when I wrote a poem, or like a little story about where she was running to, because people were really curious. And what came out of that way of closure to this big epic exhibition and this artwork was this poem about a place where miracles were created, which was star-filled. It was just endless, boundless stars, galaxy in the galaxy with a sea, and islands with star trees growing out of them, and that was all that there was in this imaginary landscape that I intuited in this poem. And after that, I had, for the next year and a half, all I could do was create this paintings about this imaginary landscape that this poem had led me to, which was in turn inspired by this painting, which was part of this other exhibition. And so sort of one led to the other, and this waterfall was one of the many constellation landscapes that I did. It was like I just kept painting different angles of it. Eventually people floating, flying, and sort of dancing and touching the stars, kind of that knew how to live and work with this landscape and existed in this imaginary landscape appeared. But initially I was just painting copious amounts of different versions of this constellation landscape and these star trees. So
beautiful.
This one was the largest version. I kept doing lots of small ones, and then they just slowly evolved until they started getting people in them. And then when I got curious, I asked myself, like we said before, like I wonder, artistic curiosity and then a story curiosity. So two sides. One is my art side that's interested in the technical and is drawn by these things that might challenge me artistically, and curious about the artwork itself and wanting to sort of push it. And then another part of me is interested in the folklore, the mythology that's unfolding in the work. So those two sides and anything in between come together and sort of led me to wondering what would happen if I zoomed in and started looking at what these people look like. So, and what would happen if, for example, if I went bigger. So when I asked myself what would happen if I went bigger, the waterfall appeared. So he's about to ride over the star tree like a waterfall and come out the other end. And I mean, they were in a state of curiosity and bliss and play and wonder. And these were the people that, it was this space that things get created, that miracles and dreams form. After this painting is what I said, well, now that I've gone big, it absolutely extinguished my desire and my need and the artwork's need and this imaginary landscape's need to be seen in the same way. And once I wanted to zoom in and look at what these people look like. Colour started flooding in. It just started in the island. You can see, so my early islands were only green with lots and lots of patterns and dots, but they were more or less 3 or 4 colours. It was blue, white, and green in all of the landscapes.
The detail is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and it's a big painting.
But Effie. You're in the flow right now, but I got to go to the next painting. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to show everybody, Omal.
This is what I'm like.
This is the artist getting into the flow, man.
Oh my goodness. Give me a floor to
Okay, let me go to the next one because we got some amazing paintings here. I want everybody to see these, okay? But I don't think you're going to be able to. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to go into that much detail with each. Okay.
I give you permission to interrupt me. Okay.
No problem. Well, listen, your passion is inspiring, so I don't want to mess that up. But okay, this is very similar to the one behind you. It's in the same series, right?
Oh, that's right. So this was from the Fisherman and Mermaid's Tale. So this is Earth Icon number 1. So I was doing this, creating paintings in response to this story that was kind of given to me, by these artworks in Brazil. And I was not illustrating the story so much because each time that I was doing an artwork, new things would come up. Imagine like an accidental splash or a need to use your brush in a certain way could create a new image that then fed into the story that I hadn't anticipated. So I was going really strongly doing these elements of the story starting from the beginning, and I needed a break. So I went on a holiday to freshen up my mind and step out of it, because I didn't want to get into an illustrative, descriptive kind of mindset. And I knew that I needed a little bit of space. So in an aeroplane, looking out the window, I saw in my mind's eye these iconic figures, a woman holding a crystal, but a very rough crystal from the earth. And
Well,
then
I would say that's an amethyst. I refer to that as an amethyst.
And then an Australian native, like a protea or banksia in their hands. And I grabbed this, the bag that you vomit in from the aeroplane, and I started sketching, these and they had like a mandala geometry. I just saw this, had just this quick flash of what I thought would be some cool images to freshen the palette. You know how you freshen the palette.
I love this.
Yeah, and so when I got back to my studio after my break, I just bought some canvases. Luckily, I got some big canvas. I meant them to be small because I wanted just to have a little break from my exhibition. But I found this great price on some large canvases, and I just started pumping out these images that I had. And I thought that had nothing to do with the story, Ron. And then by the time I finished the first icon, and I was moving into my second icon, the one that was behind me, it suddenly dawned on me that they were part of the exhibition, because I had stopped the paintings of the fisherman and mermaid just at the point in the story where she is asking to have her tail transform into legs, which means she's about to be able to step onto the earth. And there I go on my trip in the airplane and see these earth icons.
Beautiful.
And I was calling them earth icons. Oh. And then I realized that these paintings were earth entities, energies, goddesses that were preparing, almost as a ceremony, preparing the ground, the earth, preparing the earth to welcome the mermaid, because she was crossing from one realm into another. It could have been cataclysmic, like something
I love
amazing.
this.
And that's where the artwork was leading me, and not me leading, and that the art was leading and creating the story for me.
That's incredible.
Isn't it amazing? And
it is amazing. But I got to tell you, when I first seen this, the first thing I feel is my heart expanding. There's something about the amethyst, and she's holding it there in front of her chest, and the energy that comes forth just expands my heart. So now we're shifting to the next one, Effie. We got to let her go. Okay? We're letting her go. Okay. Give me a minute and a half. A minute and a half on this one, dear.
Easy, because we've prepared the ground, because I was talking about, this is the last painting of the Fisherman and Mermaid's Tale exhibition. So the exhibition had paintings and sculptures, and that's another story. But this is the finale of
I love this. It's beautiful.
So the fisherman and the mermaid, they fall in love. Eventually, and it's a beautiful story. I'd love to tell it, but we're not going to have time. At the end of their journey together on the earth, because she asks to have her tail transformed into legs. So this is a slightly more descriptive painting, because it was such a powerful image. I really felt, I knew that I wanted to see it. So this is right at the end. This is like the spoiler alert, where he transforms into a dolphin to bring her back to the sea.
Oh, so my goodness.
Stories and cultures and myths about a mermaid, and they're usually tragic, or for either the human or for the mermaid. And many cultures have got different stories. In this one, I was given a story, or I have a story that is like no other, only in that everything is balanced out. Here, she transforms her tail into legs to know his world. It's not a sacrifice though, because she has a ball. She learns, she gets curious and discovers all these incredible things about the earth. But at the end, he goes through this massive transformation on their 8th year on the earth. And he slowly, and suddenly in this really amazing way, almost like a movie, transforms into a dolphin. And then she just walks into the water, climbs onto his back, and they go off into the next phase of
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, we're going on to the next one, dear.
And that one's called Diamond Star. Diamond Star.
Well, we already talked about this one, so we'll go to the next one, okay?
Yeah. Cool.
What about this one?
Yeah, it's still the same. So that's Earth Icon 1 we spoke about, Earth Icon 2. So this one's that one's Earth Icon 3. So that she's holding an onyx. And after that, I was going to do Earth Icon 4 because that was the plan, but the painting that came out was all in the water, and then that's another story.
Your creativity is so awesome. When you first see the arms, you don't recognize them as arms. It almost looks like it's a window in the background, and then you see its arms holding the onyx, and you're like, "Oh my God, the creativity!"
And the beauty of this is if you have them in a space, or if you look at them again, you start to uncover even more. So at any point, I can go into these and draw out more of the story that exists because it's already it's in there.
Yeah.
But it's a space. It takes attention to go into that. And now,
yeah, I understand.
We go into the other one because so they're all part of the Fisherman and Mermaid's Tale. I'm glad you chose them. So these are a separate series of work that I do. And they're like a different dimension of work. So the other stuff's more my fine art, where I go into storytelling and follow the work and relate to it in this way. This is an example of my personal icons. So these I actually create for others. These are commissioned pieces. So this is more where I have conversations with someone about their histories, their own personal symbology, because everyone has it. And I become the auxiliary, the extension of that person and paint something for them.
Okay, so this is a service you provide.
Yeah, so I intuit using all these different things that I techniques and ways that I work to create an image that relates. It's like a sacred, say a religious icon, but without it being religious. So these are very personal.
I understand.
Altar pieces or things that hold symbology to honor something, or reminders for people, or a contract or a projection for the future, something important. And again, the connections become quite profound.
Yeah, when we talked the other day and we were talking about consciousness and everything, you're downplaying it so much, and now you're just swimming in it. You know what I mean?
My language is the language of
I know, but listen, your language of art is so darn deep. Is this a painting or is this something else?
No, this is a sculpture. So if you have a close look above his forehead, it's a brush. So that's a massive brush. So this is about a meter in height, and not a hairbrush. It's like a body brush. So it's quite a large brush. So this is a mixed media sculpture. There's lots of levels and paint and canvas. And
I see. It looks very shamanistic.
Yeah, it's been sewn, and there's wire, and it's a mask. And this was inspired. So when you asked me earlier what inspires me,
yes.
I get inspired by the artwork that came before, because of the way that I respond or have a dialogue with the work and allow the next artwork to say something more about the one that came before it and create relationships. So in a way, I don't need to be inspired. I don't need to generate it, because the minute one piece is created, it leads to the next.
Interesting.
So I weave these connections between them,
it's
so that
never ending. It's never ending. It's never ending. You got enough to last you many lifetimes. Okay, here's the next one.
It's amazing when there's shadow. Yeah. Okay. So that's. So remember how earlier I was talking about the painting of this girl running down a hill covered in stars, and the background was stars, and how
Yes.
that painting led to then a year and a half of creating constellation landscapes. Well, in that particular exhibition, it was called Tales of Love and Reason, the Lion Constellation. Um, and again, I'm going to try not to go into detail about what that was about. But in that exhibition, in that body of work, in that galaxy of work, let's say, I had these spontaneous paintings, similar to how the Earth icons occurred, where in the midst of doing this, creating the story, I had this moment of painting a lion came into the story, which was spontaneous. And then the next painting I created was a black canvas, which was incidental because I went to get my canvases and they had these black canvases there. And I had never painted on black because I'm a color person, but I bought them spontaneously. And of course, there was a purpose to them. So when I started painting on this black canvas, which was an artistic curiosity, and I had the intention of creating a lion, for some reason, I can't explain it, but purely, yeah, let's not explain it. I started painting from the center out. And as I painted with the intention of creating a lion, this lion came about purely from doodle shapes. Like they were just free flowing patterns and shapes, but with the intention of forming a line somehow. But imagine starting right at the center without
Oh,
any drawing.
it's amazing
And
because you were in an altered state of consciousness. And, when it's not, when you say constellation and galaxies, I don't know if you're familiar of the planet in the star system, Lyra, and they're the lion people. Okay.
no, that's just wonderful.
And
So
here's another one.
yeah, so there were 4 paintings, and slowly the lion opens its mouth. And then when I created these, and whilst I was in a different state of consciousness when I was doing these, or a different state of creative process, because these just blew me away. It was one of my first, not my first, but it was one of the pinnacle. I've got a few experiences over the last 30 years of making art where I can really describe where I've had this state of being so much the observer of what I'm creating, as in I am on the outside and just watching it unfold with
Gotcha.
absolute wonder and no ego whatsoever. And these paintings were totally unexpected, and they were an absolute, like yeah, that's part of the same. So can you
Is
see
this part of the
mark?
scene right here?
Yeah. So, but yes.
I loved it. I love this painting, man. That is so beautiful. Absolutely just beautiful. And then we got another line here. No. Oh, hold on. I thought I had another. Thought I had another line here. Let's go with this one.
So in this, they're all part of the same exhibition, these ones. So in this exhibition is where the stars appeared for the first time, which then led into the landscape, the constellation landscapes with the trees and the people floating in the sky. Before that, I would never have arrived to that place had it not been for the lions. So the lions filled me with this toolbox of stars and galaxies that I had never even thought about, and had never really painted, and filled every single space like particles, yeah, infinite particles, filling every single bit of space on the canvas as it would be in the atmosphere of particles of energy and space and in stars and galaxies. I had never thought of, conceived of that, had it not been for this seemingly spontaneous artistic impulse, and the lion was the container of that. And then after that, it affected all the paintings of the rest of the exhibition.
Wow. Wow.
This was one of, and she was after the lion. So this was a deliberately painting the canvas black. I mean, I'm describing really just a story of a creative process as well. So because the black canvases, which were unintentional, because I just found them incidentally and they just took my attention and I got curious, to then deliberately understanding that the black was helping me explore this new visual language, which was opening me up to a much deeper story and energy and imagery.
And there's something there with the lion, by the way. The lion, I have a huge lion tattoo right here. Lions have a special significance for me. And there's definitely a connection with Lyra and the galaxies and the constellation. And you should just Google that at some time. And when I saw this, I said, that is Effie's Mona Lisa.
Well, yeah. So these are sculptures. So these were part of the exhibition. This is like a slightly stylized photo of them because they were set up differently. So in that painting of, which is called Starlight Reunion, of the girl running down the hill with the stars in the background and the stars camouflaging over her clothing, 3 trees appeared at the bottom of that picture. So say artistically, I needed to balance the castle that was, as a composition. I balanced it out by creating these trees at the bottom, partly driven to do the trees because the picture needed technically something to balance it, and partly because the trees represented a forest that she was running into, but I wasn't so conscious of that as yet. Then I got curious about those trees. I thought, well, what are these trees? They look really, and they were just trees. They didn't have human faces on them. And what I was doing then, at that exhibition, I was exploring how a story develops when I respond to a painting with a sculpture. So if I draw out elements of the painting that I'm curious about or that I'm drawn to, and express them and try and recreate them in a new way, but in a sculpture, it propels and develops the story even further. And it gives me new awakenings, new directions that I wouldn't otherwise arrive at. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I'm gonna stop share right now. Okay.
Yes. It makes me so happy talking about it.
Well, one thing, Effie, man, I love your passion. And I love, man, it just came out. And it's no wonder you're extraordinary at what you do. And it's really my honor to have this platform to share your work, because I want people to be inspired with the people I talk to, and you've expanded their consciousness today. So before we sign off today, we've talked about the different your different levels of intention. We talked about art as a living consciousness. You say you do some art therapy as well. Can you touch upon that a little bit?
Yeah. So remember when we first started talking and you were asking about my background and sort of my study? So I did the fine art course in Australia. Then I traveled to Greece for a holiday and ended up doing 6 years of study in painting in Athens, in Greece, and in Spain. I went to Spain on a scholarship. So I sort of did these 2 very different schools of thought, because the conceptual was the art school in Australia, and then the disciplined academic fine art, this was really important, more sort of find, developing my painting and my drawing and all, just amazing. Studying Greece, it's another thing altogether. And so by then I had 2 fine art degrees, 2 very different schools of thought. Wanted to keep on studying art if I could, stay in art schools for the rest of my life. I mean, it was the perfect environment. It's got everything you need. But I came back to Australia when I graduated when I finished my fine art course in Athens in Greece, and I was going to develop my practice outside of the art school. And then I just got this really strong pull. It's funny, remember 9/11 happened and there was like this wave of change that was going through. And I reckon I just got swept up by that, but in the form of wanting to be of service in some way. And so my identity and my practice and my commitment to making art was so entrenched. That was a given. But I ended up thinking about art therapy. And again, that came to me not really knowing before exactly what form of service I wanted to take. I'd always avoided teaching. So art therapy came to me, and I found a way to study it at a master's level in Melbourne. So when I came back to Australia, so it sort of was the anchor to keep me in Australia. So I went off on that, and I studied it and practiced it professionally and did a lot of stuff in a short period of time. I probably did it for about 5 years. Concurrently making art, creating my own projects, staging exhibitions, and getting closer to how I really want to work with my art as well. So that never stopped, even though I was working full time as an art therapist. So the art therapy was something to me, another dimension of making art, behind intention and the power of art, recognizing all of that, appreciating all those things that had come naturally to me, but seeing them from a totally different perspective. So I had the head from Australia, the heart from Greece, and then the art therapy, which was going somewhere on another level altogether. One could contradict the other. One could easily contradict the other, but they all now coexist. So they live like 3 different dimensions, and they're 3 different mindsets sometimes. Somewhere they all intersect, but sometimes they can appear to be totally one against the other. And I went to India for a break because I was like for 5 years on a fast moving.
You needed some art therapy.
Well, the thing is, art therapy, and it's a very broad term, again, to cover worlds of variations, yeah? It's a world of different tacks and positions and theories and approaches and philosophies, you name it. Art therapy is a world unto itself. But I was a really big spokesperson for it, as a lot of us here in Melbourne were like new graduates, because we were promoting it in a lot of psychiatric settings and hospital settings, and with treatment teams. We were needing to educate people about its usefulness and its history at the same time as doing it. So I was, and it has enormous creative breadth. Infinite creative breadth. At least that's the approach that I was taking, because I was coming into it with the art expertise. So that was one of my strengths. So it could have sustained me for the rest of my life potentially, but I knew that it was not where my eventually, from that trip to India, I had an epiphany that that's not the avenue in which I'm going to be of service.
I understand.
So it was a need for service, but it wasn't. I realized that I needed to absolutely fulfill my life as an artist, and it was through that I was going to be of service. So that's when I sort of soaked what I got from the art, distilled what art therapy had given me as an understanding and as an experience, and put it back into my work.
Beautiful.
And
So let me ask you a question, Effie. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to get some of your paintings, have some of your services, talk to you, whatever they want to do? How do they get in touch with Effie?
Wow, I mean, that would be amazing. I've got so I've got two websites. I'd love people just to look at, just engage with the work. That's what it's there for. It's there to be seen and for people to connect with it first and foremost.
And
So
what are those websites?
Yeah, so my main website is efrossiniart.com, www.efrossiniart.com, and my name Efrossini is E-F, one F, R-O, and then two S's, I-N-I, art.com.
And we'll have links down in the description as well, but go ahead.
So that's my main website. That sort of gives a bit of the big picture. On Instagram, same name. And then I've got another website called Modern Icon Art. And that's another, we haven't even covered that at all. That's another strain of work, a very particular kind of work that I do as well, but needed its own website, Modern Icon Art. That's got heaps of really gorgeous stuff in there for people to read and be inspired by. So moderniconart.com.
Beautiful.
Those websites, and get in touch with me anyway, and any questions. Happy to talk about art making, and happy to talk about art therapy. And I've got an art for sale section in my website, Efrossini Art, and I'm always producing every day, making almost new work. So Instagram is usually and Facebook is where my most current work gets shared, and then eventually it filters through to the website.
So, Effie,
yes,
I want to thank you for sharing your passion today, sharing your beautiful artwork and what you're bringing into the world. So, officially, I want to thank Efrossini Chaniotis, artist extraordinaire, for your time today. And I'm going to be leaving you. I'm going to sign off, but I'm going to leave the viewers and stay signed on to the very end. I'm Ron Ario. This has been the Journey to Awakening podcast. We'll see you on the other side, and I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to end with this.